Hey, Andrew, thanks for joining us today. As way getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey Brian, thanks for having me. Uh, yeah, I'm a native New Yorker. I speak fast and directly. Son of Greek immigrants. Uh, I'm in sales, obviously, but I think the way I got into sales was because I just love technology.
Yeah.
Ever since I was young, remember my dad bringing home an IBM laptop the size of like a huge suitcase, and I was like, "Whoa, this is amazing!" And everything ever since then, like my life and career has been about technology. And I went to school, thought about being a lawyer, consultant, but the Oracle came calling. And at the time, I had a lot of peers going to work at Facebook or Google or something like that. And I realized like it's good to go with a big brand name. And I went to do their kind of 2 month enterprise sales training program, and that was like the
You were
jump
hooked?
start of my career. Yeah, sorry.
You were hooked?
Yeah, yeah. I realized I studied economics and psychology, and it was kind of this interesting dynamic of the two.
Yeah.
And that was the best training ground I could have ever gotten. Kind of cut my teeth in enterprise sales, and I could have never thought I was negotiating like six-figure deals when I was 22, but I realized quickly I love to build. And as the son of immigrant entrepreneurs, I think it's only natural that I've worked in tech startups ever since. And did the polar opposite, moved to a 15-person seed stage startup in San Francisco. I remember my VP at Oracle called and he goes, "Hey, is this a real company? It doesn't even look like they have customers or, or anything like that." And I go, "No, it's real. It's real." And I learned a lot. Like, I was kind of the person that was the BDR, the AE, the account manager, the marketer, the events person. And I did that for a bit. I spent some time out in Silicon Valley, learned kind of what early stage sales looks like. And I then did what I think was the best thing I could have ever done, which was I started a company. So my friend who I used to work with, he called and said, "Hey, I have this idea for a company using data to drive decisions for real estate investors." And at the time, I had no wife and no kid and no mortgage, and it felt like I couldn't do it now. That's for sure. I guess like ignorance is bliss in many ways. Uh,
And
and
did your
yeah,
parents give you any pushback on getting into sales? Because you went to a great
yeah.
college, right?
Did they
This
give me pushback? No, and I'm soon to be a father, so I always try
oh
and look
boy.
back and think about what my parents taught me. And I think my parents were always really empowering. I think ultimately what they wanted to ensure is that I like built a career in a specific craft. And they they they're entrepreneurs in their own right. They did their own unique things, but like technology was like the next frontier to them.
Yeah.
And so they thought if I'm working in tech and I'm making a good living, then that's all that, and I
All
love
that
it. That's all
matters.
that really matters. Yeah.
Cool. And how long did it take before you felt at home in sales?
Oh, I still don't feel at home in
No, I
sales.
just don't. Neither do I sometimes.
Yeah, I still don't. And I still every day I'm like, wow, I didn't think about doing that. Or, my reps teach me something that I hadn't done before. But truly at home, probably, or initial phases of being at home, probably 3 years in,
Yeah.
I would say.
Cool. And
But yeah.
what were some of the milestones along the way? Because you go to a big company with lots of structure, it's matrixed, you're
Mhm.
you're you're somewhere in there,
Yeah.
and it's kind of comfortable a little bit because you got a lot around you. A lot of
Yeah.
stuff will happen naturally, and a lot of stuff you can do. But then going to a startup, it's just the opposite. Nothing
Mhm.
happens unless you make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What was that
My,
transition like?
the it was really hard. There's no doubt. Uh, at at Oracle, I mean, you have your 6 accounts, you have the list of 100 people you need to know. You try and add value where you can and keep tabs on what's going on, and you work towards something. It's like that's to me, like that was just like fishing in a pond in many ways, but
Yeah.
startup, you have to learn a new language. Like your ICP is everyone. How do you
Boil
focus
that
on
down. Yeah.
who you're going after? But I think this ties back to what you said earlier. Like 3 years in, I felt like at that point I was a year into the startup, and I recognized that if you really understand your buyer's day-to-day life, then you don't even need to know your product. You can like suss out deals pretty quickly
Yeah.
and sell deals pretty quickly. And I think I got inspired, like HubSpot as an example. I know they make every new hire like build a website, like be your buyer.
Yep.
And that was kind of like the light bulb moment, I think, for me, at least early on. There's still a lot more that come along the way.
And what was are you more comfortable now at a startup? Would you ever go back to a big company?
If they call me to be CEO,
Yeah.
I would be.
That might happen.
Yeah. No, I mean my long-term aspiration is to be the CEO of a publicly traded company. So
Yeah.
yes, I would. Ideally, it's my company or a company I help build, right? But I think that's the only circumstance I go back to a big company. I'm a builder. I like taking some, or maybe a masochist in many ways, taking like a really complicated, complex problem and turning it into something real.
Yep.
Is what I really enjoy, kind of that like 0 to 10 phase.
And what's your strongest sales characteristic?
I like to consider myself a vicious project manager.
Good. Yeah.
So which I actually think is kind of like the hidden key to sales that no one really talks about in any book. Very few like sales books actually talk about this, but it's all the like micro things that you do along the cycle that actually drive the cycle forward, from the first call before you speak to the prospect, like sending them an email, like, here's some resources. What do you want to get out of this call? Here's what I think I want to cover, right? Like you've already informed their opinion on what the call is going to be, setting the upfront contract, ending the call with clearly prescribing next steps, executing on those that day. When you get to business value, like, and like trying to demonstrate value to executives, like putting together a very comprehensive deck. Like, I don't think anything I've done as a salesperson, no one else, like, I think every single other person out there can do it. But
yeah. Well,
do you actually do it?
You have to do it. That's
question.
the challenge. You can't just say, oh, I know, I've done it a million times. A lot of people just don't want to do the work.
Right.
And a lot of people,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
well, a lot of people think that sales and selling, it's all about just talking and persuading, and that's it. It's like, not in the enterprise. It's those project manager things.
Yeah.
Driving the process, defining the process, keeping the process moving.
For sure. Yeah. And what I was going to say is, like discovery is an example. That's really hard. And some people can try their whole life and not be good at discovery. But if you just show up and set the agenda and drive next steps and do what you say you're going to do in a timely fashion, you'll at least get to a decision pretty quickly, in my mind. But I totally agree with you. I think 2 episodes ago, you had someone on who was talking about they were a global account manager. They were managing a virtual team of 15 people. Like they were a salesperson, right? But like they're managing their virtual team and the process and orchestrating kind of like a conductor in a way.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like the underlying piece.
And that's it, because I think until people figure that out and apply it, they're kind of guessing. They're trying to make the complex sale look like the simple sale. And it doesn't, because the client doesn't really know how to buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what's your weakest sales characteristic?
I think this is my weak. Well, I'm getting it's an active area of development for me. And I think I've gotten 10x better over the past 10 years, but I still have the potential to get 100x better, which is like difficult conversations. I
Yeah.
hate like my like growing up, I was always the person that's like, be polite, be cordial, don't make people feel uncomfortable, avoid conflict, etc. And I think in sales, radical candor is incredibly important.
It is.
And
Yeah.
and that doesn't mean be an asshole or be
Not at all. No.
aggressive. It means being like
Honest.
politely assertive and while being also empathetic. So perfect example right now, no one wants to talk about the economy, right? Or imagine many salespeople don't want to talk about the economy. And it's because it might derail their deal. I want to address that head on from the outset. Like, hey, I know a lot of CFOs are tightening their budget because of the macroeconomic conditions. Do you think that'll affect our conversation today at all? Or this conversation? And you get a pretty quick answer from there. Yeah, but that applies to everything, right? Like if you're sensing a buyer is not seeing the value or they're wishy-washy, say, hey, look, I'm getting the sense you're not seeing the value here.
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, no, that's not the case. I see value in X, Y, and Z. And like they start selling it back to you. But
Yeah.
these
Or
are all
they,
kind of, yeah, good.
they might say you're right.
Yeah.
And then they tell you the truth.
Yeah. Mhm.
And did you identify this yourself or did somebody tell you this?
I identify it kind of in layers, I think.
Yeah.
It's probably been the piece of, in different ways, piece of feedback I've gotten from sales leaders or founders I've worked for. And yeah, it's been an active area of development for me. I think I'm actually like top 10% in it now, but now that you're kind of aware of it, you're like, wow, there's so much more to be done, basically.
And how'd you get better at it? Did you just practice it or remind yourself to do it? Because it's
Yeah,
easy after the call to say, I should have pushed on that a little bit more because you're sitting around wondering.
yeah. Uh, I I think I'm lucky enough to have had mentors and leaders who like keep pushing me on the things that they know I've needed to get better at, which I think has propelled me forward in many ways. And maybe I'm a sicko, but like negative feedback is the most motivating thing to me. So until I hear like you're better at that now or you're good at that now, that's motivating to me. So I think that was one piece. So give credit where credit is due. And then there's like just daily habits that you need to, if like pick an area of development and like checkbox, did I have a difficult conversation today? That was something I actually did
Yeah.
at one point. So
And how did you come about enjoying or craving or desiring this feedback? Because most people don't want to hear it.
I think it's just, I wish I had like a good answer. I think it's just part of who I am. In like just by nature. I also like had a Greek grandpa who didn't go to high school, who when I would come home and tell him I got a good grade, he'd be like, why don't you get 100 in a very serious face? And I didn't think he was, I just assumed that like, unless I got 100, that like I did a poor job. Little did I know, like years later, I found out he would brag about me to everyone else, but that's certainly a part of it. And I think my mom may have inherited that from him. And so
Yeah.
she pushed me as well, but
There you go. Because some people either integrate that into their personality or they fight against it. Most
yeah,
people aren't neutral about it,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it helps you,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
And
And
did
I
you
think
get that in school?
Little bit. Um, I think, yeah, a little bit, I guess.
Yeah,
But I think ultimately, like, coachability is a salesperson's best asset, basically.
it is.
And I, again, fortunate enough to have like good leaders early on that kind of ingrained that in me. And so it became like a reinforcement loop in that way.
And do you have a mentor today? Friends, coworkers, people that you talk to consistently?
Yeah. I never thought of it this way, but I listened to like a podcast the other day with Tesla's ex-president. And he talked about like horizontal and vertical mentors.
Yeah.
Like there are those that are your peers and those who like are two steps ahead. And I think have a healthy amount of both, basically. That I keep in touch with, whether it's from like former companies or just like random cold outreach to people that have now become sounding boards. And yeah, that's generally my MO is to get feedback from others.
And do you build it into your process? Meaning like each deal, each conversation, each meeting have kind of a post-mortem or a grading system of judging how well you did so you can show your grandpa?
Yeah, I think the single biggest innovation in sales has been call recording software because you can do the Monday morning quarterbacking. So I definitely, when I was still selling full time, I would definitely do that. And that's a really important piece to me now with my team is once a week, giving one person at least like 2 to 3 pieces of feedback, so that they can go action on it.
And if you found most sales reps like it or dislike the coaching?
I think to varying degrees. Um, some love it, some are neutral, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think that's like all the reps that we have like it, because that's like a characteristic that we look for when we hire, basically.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Because
yeah.
typically there's some coaching when they're a kid, either through sports
Mhm.
or music or some type of performance,
Mhm.
and they get used to that. And it translates well into the professional world. But if people haven't had that, it kind
Oh
of
yeah.
feels like criticism a little instead of
Yeah.
coaching.
Yeah. 100%. That's
Yeah.
why coming back to the beginning of the conversation, difficult conversations, there's a like very fine line between radical candor and like toxic like aggressiveness, basically. So language and words matter when delivering feedback, for sure.
Yeah. And how do you do it with your reps? Let's say the most sensitive
Yeah.
one. You don't have to give names
Yeah.
or anything.
If this, then that kind of feed. So you did this. Here's what I would have done. Here's a resource and a script on how you can use that.
Yeah.
As opposed to like that wasn't a good talk track or you didn't do a good job or something like that. But it's like replacement behavior, basically.
Yeah. And do you have a system to personal development system? You keep track of things every day?
For myself,
Yeah.
I the way I kind of look at things is on a 90-day and a 3-year horizon.
Okay.
And at the beginning of every year, I think of the 3-year horizon. And at the beginning of every like quarter, I think about the 90-day horizon and what is it that I want to get better at. And yeah, if you want to do another podcast on personal productivity and all that, I geek out on that stuff. But I just have like in my to-do list on my computer, I just have recurring tasks for like the actions or behaviors that I want to be doing
There
on
you
a
go.
daily
So it's on your
basis. Yeah.
calendar.
Yeah. Pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people write it down at the beginning of the year and they don't look at it till the next year. They have the same one, lose 10 pounds, make 10 more calls a day, whatever it is.
Yeah.
and they feel comfortable having written it down as opposed to executing it. Putting
Yeah.
on the calendar is great because you got an automatic reminder with no effort.
Yeah. I think systems and or habits and systems are the best way to operate. I mean, especially in sales, because that's kind of the nice thing about sales. There's like a determined outcome that like happens regularly. So, like QBRs are actually a very good like reflection mechanism if done right. But if you think in systems and have daily systems in place, they build into weekly results and quarterly outcomes, I think.
That's it, because without a system, you're kind of going gut feel. You're shooting from the hip,
Mhm.
and our emotions take over as opposed to our logic. Because what usually feels good is not always the best thing to do. If you
100%.
if you can tell where you are in your project plan, you kind of know where to go and how you got there and what can go wrong next.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I drive the reps crazy with like like we're it's November 17th today. We have 43 days left in the quarter. We can assume that everyone's going to be out beyond December 24th. So that means we should be targeting the 21st as a date to close, which means we need to sign contract on the 19th, which means here are the 12 check boxes that need to happen, which means proposal needs to be out today. And so codify that into like every rep's process and into Salesforce. And that's, I think, the only way to be successful in sales in my mind.
Yeah. And what do most reps do? They put December 31st as the expiration date on the proposal, and then it slips into next year. Now, were
Yeah,
you
I mean,
raised with this type of structure? Did your parents have that kind of long term?
my dad is an accountant by trade, and everything was organized and has a place, including paper.
Yeah.
Like if I called him and said, hey, like, can you send me a picture of the first page of your 1989 tax return? He'll be like, yeah, give me a minute. Uh, so, and his desk was organized that way, his desktop icons. And so just like the little things that you pick up along the way. So yeah, I think so.
That's it, because a lot of the great reps that I've met, they all have a system. Some it's not written, some the best ones it's written because it's too complex, especially when you have 10 deals a quarter, 20 deals a quarter. How do you keep track of where you are in each of them
Yeah.
without having some type of written plan? Was that why going into management was comfortable for you? Is that you already had that structure and the discipline and the process?
Yeah. I, yeah. I mean, my perspective on management is the manager should be the best sales rep on the team. So I think first and foremost, that's why I feel really confident in leading a team, is because I know the product and the company and the industry and the buyer and everything like as best as possible. But if I didn't have a system, I would, even with that, I'd falter, I think.
Yeah. I think too many people think they just keep it in their head. It's the worst place for it to be because emotions will always take over.
100%. Yeah, totally
And
agree.
what do you look for when you hire salespeople?
Yeah. Couple of key things. I have talk about a system. I have like a 15-point scorecard, but generally, I think just to start, the first call is soft skills. So empathy, kindness, engagement, proactivity, like, are they doing the right research? Are they asking the right questions, right? Like testing for discovery skills. As you dive deeper, coming back to systems, like, is there a process and a system in place that isn't I do medic, or I do band, or I do X, right? Like I ask a question like, tell me like your your philosophy on sales. And if I hear like, always serve the customer, and like if there's like a surface level answer,
Yeah. It's all about
then it's clear.
relationships.
Yeah. Then it's clear that there's no system
Right.
in place. Uh, and then I think thoroughness and like discipline and organization, I think comes out when you talk about deals. So tell me about a recent deal you won, or the steps you took. What about a deal you lost? Shows like empathy and ability to like be self-aware and take feedback and ownership if they mess something up. And yeah, those are some of the core things I'd say.
And how often do you find that they do have a system beyond a platitude or an acronym?
Not very often,
Yeah.
like 20% of the time.
Yeah. And would you hire them if they didn't have that? Or is that something just to know before you hire them?
Yeah, I would. But I think there needs to be a higher degree of self-awareness and coachability
Yeah.
to augment the other one. So if you don't have like it's like a weighted scale, right? Like if you're low, then the other components need to be a little bit higher.
And what drives you crazy about other salespeople? I'm sure you saw a lot of big companies that you don't have to name anybody, but I'm sure you sat through QBRs and you're like, that deal's never going to close. Right?
Yeah, the ability to not be able to persecute your own deals. So I never ask like what's going on in this deal. I always try and ask like, why are we going to lose this deal? And the best reps proactively mention the 3 to 5 risk factors in the deal and their plan for addressing them. So I think that's really the big piece.
And what's the most common reason that you hear?
The most
Why?
common reason that the deal's at risk, like not a strong champion,
Yeah.
probably. I think then it's not a champion, and then you got to go find one to use the John McMahon medic talk track, but that's probably the biggest one. And then the second one is probably like, oh, there's no budget, which I think we all have differing opinions on budget, but there's never budget for anything unless you're selling copiers because people have been buying them for 20 years.
Yeah.
So you need to demonstrate the value in a case for budget at some future point in time.
And what skill would really take your game to the next level? I mean, we talked about being able to push back and the radical candor, but even as like a sales leader.
Yeah. The ability to process information faster.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a hard thing to work on. But if like our founder, she's incredible. The pure amount of information that I see her process on a daily basis, it makes it clear to me why she's in her role.
Yeah.
Because she can take an information, pattern recognize, make a decision and make a recommendation and move on. And so if you think about that within the context of sales, like the more insight you could get into a deal, the more prescriptions you can make on what the next step should be, or the more insight you could get on like how are reps doing a discovery call, the faster you can prescribe some path forward on how to be better, essentially. So yeah, processing information, but that's kind of a tough one to work on.
Yeah, I guess it takes time, right? Just repetitions. because during the QBRs, you can kind of probably hear about the deal and pretty much know where it is and where it has to go and what's going to go wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and a good hack is doing your homework, uh, which not just for QBRs, but for sales calls or just
Everything.
any. Yeah, like if you come in with an informed opinion, you'll be able to probably make a decision quicker. So
Cool. Hey, Andrew, really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
so a few places. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the primary place. My last name is a big mouthful in Greek. It's Ermogenes, but Andrew Ermogenes, Ermogenous, and on Twitter also at Ermogenius, which switch out the O with an I. It's a play on words.
And do you happen to be looking for anybody?
Always experienced enterprise sellers in the data and analytics space that have worked at stars before, or not. Like if you think you're a great SaaS software seller, give me a buzz.